If you're tired for no reason, or you have brain fog, or you have trouble sleeping, or you're just feeling off and not sure why, this could all be due to low magnesium. And if you've been online at all this past year, someone has probably told you that you need to take a magnesium supplement. And the truth is, sometimes that advice is correct, but sometimes it's overhyped. And almost nobody tells you how to figure out if magnesium is actually the answer for you. And if you do need magnesium, which formulation is the best? Because taking the right form can be the difference between this actually working or a daily pill that does basically nothing. So in this video, I want to go over how to think about magnesium, and more importantly, I want to go over the magnesium gray zone. And I'll explain what it means in just a little bit, but this gray zone is where a lot of people end up without even realizing it. And it's something that most doctors aren't specifically trained to look for. And then we'll go over who's most likely to benefit from supplementation and how to choose the right form of magnesium. And if you're new to this channel, I'm Dr. Drkim. I'm a double board certified physician, and my mission is to give you the science and practical tools to live longer and feel better. And as always, even though I'm a physician, I'm not your physician. So please talk to your doctor before making any changes to your health regimen, as this video is educational only and not medical advice. Let's get into it. So let's start with the big question. Are you actually low in magnesium? And the answer changes a lot depending on what we mean by low, because there are two very different situations when it comes to that. So first, someone could have a severe magnesium deficiency, the kind that shows up on a blood test and it requires urgent medical attention. And that situation is actually not that common. If you're eating a reasonably varied diet and you don't have medical conditions like type 2 diabetes or gastrointestinal issues, or you don't drink a lot of alcohol, or you have a genetic predisposition, there's a good chance you may not be in that category of severe deficiency. Also, medications. Sometimes being on medications like diuretics or proton pump inhibitors, so things like Prilosec or Nexium or Prevacid, those medications can also increase magnesium wasting. But here's where things get interesting, and this is a very important differentiation point. There's a huge gap between somebody being not deficient and somebody being optimal. And that gap is where most of the symptoms and most of us live. Now, why does being just a little suboptimal matter so much? And here's why. Magnesium is involved in over 300 enzyme reactions in your body, and enzymes are the proteins that make chemical reactions happen. Without them, the basic machinery of being alive and every cellular process, all that just stops working properly. And magnesium doesn't just touch one organ system. It sits at the intersection of three of your body's most important systems: your cardiovascular function, and your nervous system, and your metabolic health. And this is exactly why being even a little suboptimal can ripple across so many parts of how you feel. And it's not just one thing. You may feel tired, or you feel wound up, or you don't sleep right, or your muscles cramp. Maybe your blood pressure is running just a little high, and none of it adds up to a single diagnosis, because the problem isn't in one place, it's everywhere magnesium is supposed to be. And the big problem is many stay in that gray zone for years, and that has a long-term cost that almost nobody talks about. More often than not, we're trained to spot dangerously low magnesium on a blood test. If your level falls below a certain cutoff, you're flagged, but if it doesn't, you're not. And that approach only catches people that are severely deficient. The ones who need immediate medical treatment, but it misses almost everyone else in that gray zone. And the problem with that approach is less than 1% of your body's total magnesium is actually in your blood. The rest, more than 99% of it, lives inside your cells, your muscle tissue, and your bones. And blood magnesium is very tightly regulated. Your kidneys and your bones, they work really hard to keep that number stable, even when your tissue stores are failing. Which means when your intake drops or your demand goes up, your body doesn't immediately let blood magnesium fall. Instead, it pulls and borrows magnesium from your bones to keep that number in the blood in the normal range. And one of the biggest storage sites of magnesium is your skeleton. Your body treats that storage like a savings account. When your daily intake doesn't cover your daily demand, you pull from those magnesium savings. And short term, that works fine, but over years and decades of repeatedly pulling from your bone stores to cover the gap, there's a real long-term cost. Research has linked chronic suboptimal magnesium levels to lower bone density and higher risk of fractures over time. So why are so many of us in this gray zone in the first place? Because our modern life is almost perfectly designed to put us there. And there are two sides to this mismatch. The average person's intake of magnesium has gone down quite a bit over the past few decades. And for many of us, the demand for magnesium has also gone up. And for many people, both of these are happening at the same time. So let's start with the intake side. Unfortunately, modern food processing just strips magnesium out. So processed breads, processed cereals, ultra-processed foods, they contain far less magnesium than their whole food counterparts. And the foods that are naturally high in magnesium, things like nuts and seeds, legumes, leafy greens, whole grains, well, those are exactly the foods that have unfortunately dropped out of your typical standard American diet. Now let's look at the demand side. And there are specific things in modern life that actively pull magnesium out of your body. And what makes this worse is magnesium is a very important mineral when it comes to helping your nervous system handle stress in the first place. So it's a two-way street. Stress depletes your magnesium, and then that low magnesium makes it more difficult to handle and process stress. And for some people, it could be alcohol, because alcohol is notorious for increasing your magnesium losses. And then certain medications can also interfere with magnesium absorption, or they can increase magnesium losses. We talked about PPIs, or proton pump inhibitors. And another one to watch out for is diuretics, which are sometimes called water pills. So these would be medications like Lasix or hydrochlorothiazide. And there are a lot more medications that can unfortunately strip away your magnesium. So if low magnesium or suboptimal magnesium is on your radar, definitely something to discuss with your doctor. So when you pull all of this together, it's actually not surprising why so many of us are deficient in this gray zone. Okay, so on the practical side, who should actually consider magnesium supplementation? Well, first, people who simply are just not getting enough magnesium from their diet, especially if the diet is high in ultra-processed foods and it's low in your typically magnesium-rich foods like leafy greens and legumes, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. Now, ideally, we try to get magnesium from foods first whenever possible, but there are several situations where it does make sense to talk to your doctor about whether adding a magnesium supplement may actually be helpful. And the first one would be poor sleep, and especially if you struggle to wind down at night, or if you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't fall back asleep because your mind is racing. Magnesium helps regulate GABA, which is your brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter. GABA is what tells your nervous system to slow down, and magnesium also helps regulate cortisol, which is your body's main stress hormone. And when cortisol stays high in the evenings, well, your body just stays in this low-grade fight or flight mode, even if you don't feel stress on the surface. Which brings me to another scenario where you may need extra magnesium, and that is if you're under a lot of stress. And this one is a real double whammy because, as we talked about earlier, stress increases magnesium losses through the urine, but your body needs magnesium to properly regulate that stress response. The more stressed you become, the more magnesium you lose, and the lower your magnesium gets, the more difficult it becomes to handle that stress, and this can all turn into a vicious cycle. Okay, another scenario where magnesium could be helpful is if somebody gets frequent headaches or migraines. Magnesium can block the NMDA receptor, which is responsible for triggering pathways that can lead to migraines. And we actually have studies like this meta-analysis of 21 randomized control trials that show that both IV and oral magnesium can reduce migraine attack severity, and it can lower both the frequency and the intensity of migraines. Now, another important risk factor for low magnesium is insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. In fact, low magnesium is 10 times more common in people with type 2 diabetes than in the healthy population. And there are several reasons why this happens. Insulin resistance changes the way your kidneys handle magnesium, which causes more of it to be lost in the urine. And at the same time, higher blood sugar levels, well, they pull more water into the urine, and when that happens, minerals like magnesium get carried out along with it. So the worse insulin resistance becomes, the more magnesium a person tends to lose. But the unfortunate part about all of this is low magnesium doesn't just result from insulin resistance. low magnesium can actually make insulin resistance worse. So that whole situation can turn into another vicious cycle. And lastly, if you have high blood pressure, magnesium becomes particularly important. Low magnesium has been associated with impaired blood vessel function and increased constriction of the arteries. And both of those things directly contribute to higher blood pressure. And we have lots of studies like this meta-analysis of 38 randomized control trials that showed that magnesium supplementation can have modest but meaningful reductions in blood pressure, especially in people who take blood pressure medications. Now, probably the most confusing part about magnesium is knowing which formulation that you actually need to take. And the answer really boils down to what you're trying to achieve and the clinical scenario. Because different forms of magnesium behave differently in the body. Some formulations are absorbed better, and some are more likely to stay in the digestive tract, and they don't really get absorbed. So instead of thinking about magnesium as one supplement, it really helps to think of it as a family of supplements. They're all delivering magnesium, but they each have slightly different strengths and weaknesses. So let's start with magnesium glycinate. If you think back to the symptoms we talked about earlier, like poor sleep or feeling stressed or feeling wound up, this is where magnesium glycinate enters the picture. It's pretty well absorbed and it has minimal GI side effects like diarrhea. And in this formulation, you have your magnesium bound to glycine, which is an amino acid that may have calming effects all on its own. Now, we don't have a whole lot of strong human data showing that glycinate is superior for sleep or stress. Most of the evidence actually comes from animal studies. But biologically, it does make sense because it's well absorbed, it's generally well tolerated, and the glycine part usually has calming effects as well. Now, if somebody's dealing with constipation, this is where we start looking at other formulations of magnesium, and this is where doctors may lean into magnesium citrate or magnesium oxide. So magnesium citrate is still fairly well absorbed and it can boost your magnesium stores, but at higher doses it can also help with constipation. Mag citrate is sometimes used as bowel prep for colonoscopies. And then we have magnesium oxide, which is very poorly absorbed. So because a lot of it stays in the digestive tract, it pulls water into the intestines, and that can help with bowel movements. In fact, gastroenterology guidelines have magnesium oxide as one of the first-line options for chronic constipation. Now, what's interesting is mag oxide has also been studied with migraines. Several headache guidelines include magnesium oxide as a reasonable option because of its potential ability to reduce migraine frequency. And then we have magnesium malate. And this one is very interesting because in preclinical studies, magnesium malate appears to be pretty well absorbed, and it may achieve particularly good levels in your muscle and your brain tissue. So this is the formulation that theoretically can help with muscle-related issues like fatigue, or cramps or exercise recovery. And for most people, it's pretty well tolerated from GI standpoint. Now, a lot of it is based on animal studies, not a whole lot of actual human data, so we just got to keep that in mind. And then we have magnesium taurate. So this could be a good formulation when it comes to cardiovascular disease. Taurate by itself has been studied in blood pressure regulation and insulin sensitivity. It's been studied in heart stability. And then on the flip side, magnesium has many overlapping effects in those same areas. So when magnesium and taurine are combined together, there's this theoretical synergy that can be especially helpful in folks with high blood pressure or diabetes or heart issues. In fact, the WHO cardiac study found that higher urinary magnesium and taurine levels correlated with a lower cardiovascular risk. But once again, this is not based on any kind of robust human randomized control trials, just animal studies and observational data. And finally, there's one formulation that seems to be very popular in the longevity space, and that is magnesium L-Threonate. And that is because this is one of the formulations that appears capable of raising magnesium levels inside the brain. It can cross the blood-brain barrier. But there are a couple of important caveats to this. The actual elemental magnesium dose in this formulation is very low, usually about 7 to 8%. So it's actually not a great choice to replete magnesium stores when somebody's deficient. And when it comes to all the touted cognitive benefits, there's not a whole lot of strong evidence to support this just yet. There was a recent randomized control trial. It was pretty small, and it showed that taking magnesium L-Threonate for 6 weeks improved overall cognition and cognitive age, and it also improved working memory. But the study used a branded version of magnesium L-Threonate called Mactine, And the study was actually funded by the company that manufactures it. Now, that doesn't mean the findings were wrong. It just means we need to recognize a potential bias, which was actually disclosed as a possible conflict of interest by the authors of this paper. So there may be some cognitive benefit to it, but I definitely want to see a lot more peer-reviewed data. All right, I hope this was helpful. Stay healthy, and I'll see you in the next one.